Hello everyone, and welcome. Today I want to talk about this insane tactics build that puts together 3 different red effects in order to get a huge amount of DPS out of your tactics just passively hitting things. As you can see there, I didn't have my character attack at all. I just stood next to the boss. The 200,000 HP tree went down very easily. Now, I will say that the damage did get inflated there a little bit because the tree summons extra enemies. And the more enemies you're hitting with this build, the more damage it deals. It just multiplies the amount of damage it's dealing. Tree is still the easiest boss to show it off on because he's not moving around at all. So that's just something to keep in mind. It will still do massive damage against single targets, but the damage that I showed there did get inflated just a bit. When it comes to setting up this build, there's a certain tactic route that you need to go. You need to go with your summon lightning orbs, dash thunderbolts, and attack light wave. When it comes to your light spear options, you do have the option of going for Legacy Light Spear or Skill Light Spear, depending on whether you want to go for a 4th optional red effect or not. But we'll talk about that when we get there. So the first things that are required, and these 3 are all red effects, where if you go what I just said, if you go summon a Lightning Orb, you get Light Spears, you get your Dash Thunderbolts, and you get your Light Wave. You will unlock all of these naturally. You don't need to do anything weird with your inheritance to get this set up. It's a build you can build very naturally as you're playing. So the first part of the build is Lightning Orb Thunderbolt. Each time your rotating Lightning Orbs hits an enemy, this will make it where they spawn a Thunderbolt. Next up is Thunderbolt Light Spear. When your Thunderbolt hits an enemy, spawns a light spear that travels to that enemy, and then the final part of the build is Light Spear Light Wave. Upon hitting an enemy, light spears activate Light Wave, dealing extra damage. So, as you might have noticed from the footage I showed before, or as I was listing off the red effects, what this is doing is it's causing a chain reaction between all of these red effects to proc in a row. Your Lightning Orb summons a Thunderbolt, the Thunderbolt summons a Light Spear, and then the Light Spear summons a Light Wave. So you have around 6 damage sources hitting each time a Lightning Orb touches an enemy, and it leads to this insane DPS that you saw me do on the tree. Now, when it comes to picking upgrades for your tactics, there are certain ones that I highly recommend taking. For when it comes to lightning orbs, I recommend taking durable lightning orbs so they last longer. There is an upgrade you can play around with where the orbs can hit in a larger range, but it feels really inconsistent to me because they spread out and come back in. I prefer the consistency of just them hitting at the same range constantly. When it comes to your light spears, I very, very highly recommend Holy Light Spears. When a light spear expires, it turns into Holy Light that deals extra damage. This is quite a lot of damage, and remember that this happens each time that your lightning orb hits an enemy. So this is going to add a lot of extra DPS into the damage rotation. When it comes to Thunderbolts, I like to go Dodge Thunderbolts. This one isn't as high of a priority as the other ones, but it is very cool to see, and it can do a lot of damage too. Whenever you do a successful perfect dodge, you will summon multiple Thunderbolts, each dealing damage, and then remember that each of those Thunderbolts is then going to spawn a Light Spear, which is going to spawn a Holy Light, which deals additional damage. I think, based on what I could see, there's a little bit of an internal cooldown on the Light Spear Light Waves, so each of these Dodge Thunderbolts isn't going to be proccing the Light Wave, but it is still going to do a lot of extra damage in your basic DPS. When it comes to Lightwave, it doesn't really matter as much, but for Lightwave, I always upgrade it into flexible charging. Lightwave can now charge even while you're attacking, and it deals additional damage. This one is very important for actual Lightwave builds, because it lets you proc your Lightwave much more often. If you're ever running a Lightwave build and you're never seeing Lightwave actually come back off of cooldown, this is probably why. It really requires that flexible charging for it to be able to recharge during combat. So next up, if you have these three done, and you want to add on a little bit more to min-maxing out the Lightwave build, you can run for Legacy Light Spear and Skill Lightning. What this will do is allow you to get another red effect called Lightwave Spread. Upon hitting an enemy, the Lightwave moves to another enemy behind it, dealing a little bit less damage with each transfer. This is just something that's going to make the build do more damage in AoE situations where there's more enemies, but it's not a huge game changer in terms of the overall DPS of the build. If you have these three red effects, then you're good to go for the build. It'll be enough. So one thing you can do is, if you want to inherit your Lightspear Lightwave, you don't even actually have to take Lightwave as part of your build. You could go with something like, you could still put like a Frost attack build on top of this, which makes it a very scary build. You could also put the Frost on your Lightning, or you could put the Frost on your skill slot as well, as long as you make sure you go with the Legacy Lightspear. So when it comes to that, this has the potential of being the best build in the game by far. You would want to run these three here with these three red effects, and then instead of the Attack Lightwave and Skill Lightning, you could run something like Skill Cold or Attack Cold, and then Attack Rend or Skill Rend with Rending Impact. Those are the other two best in slot just choices in the game, in my opinion, when it comes to those two slots at least. So before we leave off, I'll go into a little bit about who you might want to use this build on. Technically, you can use it on anyone. If you're playing a ranged character like Kokonoe or Lambda, you might not be proccing the build as much if you're playing from far away, so that's something you might want to consider. I also think that Kokonoe and Lambda are better with the just Rend and Cold build, and then using Summon Radiance. But you can, like I said, you can combine the two builds together. You can combine these with that build if you really want to go all out on DPS. But anyways, Lambda and Kokonoe, I don't think they need the build as much compared to characters like Mai, Jin, and Taukaka are the three ones that I would really highly recommend putting this build on. And that's because those three characters all struggle with their actual base character DPS in the first place. Mai can do some good DPS, but it's very reliant on sitting there and holding down one of her buttons for a long time, and it's not the most fun thing to play. Whereas if you're running this build, you can be doing any attacks you want and still be doing very high DPS, because the tactics themselves will just be doing the DPS for you. It's a similar thing for Jin, where Jin can go a Frost build on his skills to do really high damage on a couple of his skills, but the thing I didn't enjoy is that as soon as I stopped using those skills, I just noticed my DPS as Jin just completely tanked, and I wasn't really enjoying playing him. Whereas when I switched over to this Lightspear-based build, I noticed that I would have a lot more fun playing him, because I wasn't so required to use the specific skills in order to deal damage. And then Taukaka as a character is a very low DPS character in general, unless you're doing things like spamming certain moves, freezing the bosses so they can't move and she can actually get DPS in. Taukaka just has a really hard time of dealing DPS in this game, unless you're using things like Black Hole Slow or Jin's Freeze. But with this build, you don't really have to worry about dealing her character DPS as much. You can just kind of throw out whatever moves you want. As long as you're close to the enemy, you'll be dealing a lot of damage. So anyways, that's it for this one. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.